Welcome to Healing the Spirit, a space where we awaken our creativity, deepen our connections, and remember who we are through the lens of astrology, archetypes, and art making. I'm your host, Jonathan Coe. Hello everyone, welcome to Healing the Spirit. Welcome to this week's episode. In these Monday episodes, I will share some of my reflections, contemplations for the coming week. And my invitation is for you to listen with your attention turned inward. And what that means is feel into what's coming up in your body, feel into what's coming up in your heart, feel into what's coming up in your intuition as you're hearing me talk about the coming week, and trust whatever is coming up and trust that that's exactly what you're supposed to be working with. So the coming week is interesting because astrologically, there's not a lot of aspects happening in the coming week. That doesn't mean, though, that there's not going to be a lot of actions, right? And so the setup of the week astrologically is quite simple. On Monday, January 29th, we have Mars in Capricorn trining Uranus and Taurus. And this trine is also pretty closely trining Juno, which is in Virgo. And then towards the end of the week, on February 2nd, we have Mercury in Capricorn, sextiling Neptune in Pisces. And so the first phrase that came into my awareness when I felt into the coming week was moving the needle forward. And so I want to unpack this a little bit because I think the different archetypes that are involved, the different planets that are involved in the coming week and the astrology of the coming week can really help us break down into greater detail and more nuance what kind of moving forward can we expect, right? Or what kind of moving forward, what are some of the options that we can feel into based on the astrology. So as I mentioned, right, we have Mars trining Uranus, trining Juno, right? And so we have a grand Earth trine between Mars, Uranus, and Juno. And so to me, there are three possibilities here, right? Or some sort of combination of these three possibilities. Possibility number one is landing into action. Possibility number two is liberating from restrictions. And possibility number three is questioning the tangibility and practicality of our commitment. So I'm going to quickly break it down, and then I'm going to talk more about them, each one by one. So when I talk about landing into action, what I mean is maybe there's something that we've been thinking about, something that we've been dreaming about, something that we've been planning that can now be put into motion, right? That we now probably quite spontaneously within this week suddenly either get an energetic uprising or the external environment kind of signals to us how we can start to move things along, right? Some pieces that were unclear or some pieces that were missing may suddenly be coming into view with the astrology of the coming week. And then possibility number two is we might find ourselves finally able to liberate from certain restrictions that have been holding us back, right? This is pretty straightforward. I think we know what this looks like, right? There's an energy of unshackling here. There's breaking away. There's saying no to something that has been holding us back. And then the third possibility is questioning the tangibility and or the practicality of our commitment. So something that we've been committed to for a while may be called into question. Something surprising may happen that brings our awareness to, oh, I actually have been committed to this other thing, right? This whole time I thought I was committed to A, but actually I was committed to B. Or we may find that certain ways of committing need to have a little bit of movement, right? Like maybe not completely broken down, but there may be reverberations of questioning, right, what that commitment actually is, or why we've been committed, or do we still need to be committed to this thing? So let's talk about the first one, landing into action, right? And when I think about landing into action, I was really looking at Mars in Capricorn trining Juno in Virgo. So if there's something that you've been wanting to do, that you know in your gut, in your body, in your heart, that you're ready to take action on it, this may be a really good time for it. It may be that your kind of more ephemeral awareness, right? When we're thinking about Juno in Virgo, right? Virgo is a mutable sign. And so the commitment that has been so far ensouled or enshrined within our actions, right, may suddenly kind of get this extra boost, right, from Mars in Capricorn. Action is not necessarily external, right? Action can also very much be behind the scenes. What I mean by that is, an action isn't necessarily you sharing your work with the world, right? An action may not necessarily be you putting something out, or announcing something, right? An action can be oriented towards supporting the structural framework of how you are operating. So maybe if you are a solopreneur, right, or you have your own business, maybe this looks like updating your website, right? It may look like cleaning your house, right? So that you have more space to kind of move around in, to just look at empty space for deeper creativity. It may be like changing the light bulb, right? Fixing something that's broken around the house, or maybe donating some books. So Mars in Capricorn provides potent forward momentum energy, right? And this is going to be true regardless of which your brand of moving the needle forward is going to look like, right? Mars in Capricorn, is really at the heart, I think, of the transits, the astrological situationships this coming week. And so it provides a lot of support for strategic action, right? It's not just about moving forward, right? The essential nature of Mars is often quite rash. Mars can be very forceful. Mars likes a lot of movement, that are not necessarily precise. But Mars in Capricorn, right, is Mars that answers to Saturn. And so it's Mars in Saturn's landscape. It's Mars in Saturn's home. And so Mars isn't necessarily fast in Capricorn, right? It may not be taking all the shortcuts, but Mars in Capricorn is highly effective, right? Mars in Capricorn has a pretty big capacity to hold, to withhold, to conserve energy, and then to move with that wellspring of energy when the direction is clear, right? So it may look like, you may be noticing that there's something that you've been committed to that perhaps you want to kind of take to the next level, right? You want to really seal the deal. You really want to kind of land into a sense of, okay, this is what I need to do. This is how I'm going to get it done, right? Step 1, step 2, step 3. And when we are thinking about this, it's interesting because my sense is that if you are drawn to an offering like this podcast, you may be the kind of person who likes to do the inner work, right? You're really comfortable, resourced, and deeply nourished by looking at your internal materials. I'm raising my hands here because I also am one of those people. And externalizing our commitment, our devotion into action may not be the most comfortable thing, right? You may have to experiment with making some mistakes. You may have to experiment with doing something that doesn't feel good, right? I remember when I first had to make my website, for example, it didn't feel good, right? Because I didn't know how to use Squarespace, and I felt silly. I felt a little bit slow. I felt kind of embarrassed, actually, right? And landing into action sounds sexy, sounds exciting, but the action or the reality of it may not be so fun, right? That you may have to learn some new skills. You may have to be humble, with yourself and with the ways that you may need more time, right, to actually feel fluent and to feel capable at doing the thing. You may feel really silly. Maybe you want to share your creations with the world through a newsletter or through Instagram, and you may feel really dumb for needing to figure things out, and you may feel like nobody's going to care about this, right? Like, these are things that may really come up, but I think at the same time, the current, right, cosmically is quite strong. And so if you want to allow yourself to practice taking imperfect action, this is a great week to do that. The second possibility is that moving the needle forward may look like liberating yourself from restrictions, right? And the reason why I say this is because Mars in Capricorn is trining Uranus in Taurus, right? And so this may point to the things that you have kind of shoved down, right? Or things that you have set aside. You are like, oh, actually, I can probably take on a little bit more work, right? I can take on that friendship or that relationship that doesn't really nurture me, but what is one more friendship going to, how is one more friendship going to hurt, right? Like, let's not make a big fuss out of this. But perhaps some part of you, especially when I'm thinking about Uranus and Taurus, I'm really thinking about the body, one of my mentors always talk about that moment when things become unbearable, like when the body is no longer able to withstand, tolerate things that it's never really wanted to do, but maybe has rationalized itself into coping with, right? You may find that there are patterns of thinking that have been haunting you that really hasn't been working for a while, right? You might notice that there are ways of interacting with others that are stopping you from accessing full creative flow. You may notice, for example, that you care a whole lot about what your friends think, when maybe your friends and you don't have the same interests, right? And maybe that doesn't mean that your friends are bad people, but it just means that they're not the right people to give you approval with this particular thing that you're trying to start up, right? And so you might be noticing that, oh, I'm continuing to source validation from these people who actually know nothing about the things that I care about, right? What if you practice setting them aside for the coming week? Just for 1 week, right? What if you give yourself a chance to pretend to play the character of the person who is no longer shackled by these restrictions? What happens if you moved through the world putting on this character, right? Like, not in in an ingenuous way, right? But just in a playful way. What if you play with being without some of these patterns for 1 week and then see what happens? I'm also thinking about how Mars in Capricorn can point us to holding patterns, right? Or like withholding patterns. I think I've kind of alluded to this a little bit. Mars in Capricorn may show you where in your life you are holding on to certain status quo, right? Certain ways of being, certain ways of looking at things that are either not working anymore, right? Maybe it worked in the past, maybe it didn't work in the past, but it's very clear that in the present moment it's not working. Or it may point you to places somewhere deeper within you where you feel ready to try something new, right? That maybe the thing is not broken, but you just want to create more space for experiment, right? Mars in Capricorn generally, right, by itself, can point to a certain level of conservatism, right? A certain level of calculation, a certain level of being quite reserved and precise with one's energy. But with this trine to Uranus, I think there is access to more of the rebellious, more of the forceful, more of this like cracking open energy of Mars, right? In its essential nature, Mars is known for straying away from paths that are set, right? There's kind of a wild, uncontained, maybe even slightly brutal nature to Mars, right? And with the support from Uranus, I think that part can kind of come up more to the surface, right? And again, I want to make space for the possibility that this may be messy, right? That sometimes the process of liberation is again such a cool word, right? I was gonna say cute. I think liberation is a cute word too, but there's kind of an aura about the concept of liberation that just feels so good. That kind of joyous expression is something that can really come up for us mentally when we think about liberation, right? There's a kumbaya energy to liberation as a concept. The reality of liberation can look quite different. The reality of liberation can look like having really difficult conversations. The reality of liberation can look like setting some boundaries when we are coming from a place of really clearly knowing within our bodies that something no longer feels good. Liberation can look like standing up for oneself, or standing up for one's communities or members of one's communities when another person is saying something that's not true, saying something that's hurtful. Liberation often feels very scary because liberation implies certain changes need to be made. Certain changes in the way we look at things, the way we do things need to happen. And the status quo can no longer be continued. It can no longer be enacted. There's comfort in living according to the script. After all, when we think about human civilization, when we think about how we are able to come together as humans who all have our individual needs and preferences and personalities into societies, we can only create societies when we are bound by certain rules. And enacting these rules and playing these roles create a certain kind of order, right? And liberation can look like stepping out of that script, stepping out of that movie and being like, hey, I don't want to do this anymore. This doesn't feel right to me. Can we explore another option? It may be met with disdain. It may be met with a lot of resistance. It may be met with a lot of fear from people that you express this towards. So allowing space again for that to be one possible scenario, right? it may also be the case that nobody minds. Everybody looks at you and agrees. Sometimes we make it a lot scarier in our heads. But other times it actually is a little bit scary because we are challenging the relational web we exist within. And what I mean by that is specifically the relational web of relationships we have with other humans around us, right? Our communities. That can feel really scary. And so finally, the third pathway or kind of possibility that I was feeling into is questioning the tangibility and practicality of our commitment. And this is inspired by Juno in Virgo, trining Uranus and Taurus. On the surface, the idea of questioning our commitment, again, can seem scary, right? When we've been devoted to something, or we've been doing something for a while, it can bring a lot of destabilizing energy to even permission ourselves to poke at it, to question it, to allow ourselves to move from being on solid ground into shifting sand. Juno is an asteroid that is in the Greek mythology represented by Hera, right? Juno is the Roman name for Hera. And in the stories of the Greek mythology, Hera is this goddess who's always frustrated and always kind of chasing around all these people that Zeus had affairs with. And so Hera is kind of this perpetually angry and disappointed figure. But to me, this patriarchal Greek portrayal is often not always in service to the true energy of Juno the asteroid. Because when we look at older significations, and the astrologer Diana Rose Harper has a beautiful lecture that I can link in the show notes below that you can check out if you are interested in learning more about Juno. In the older significations of Juno, Juno is essentially this goddess, right, that protects women, specifically also through protecting the harmony and the sanctity of marriage, right? And so Juno is, to me, an archetype, a force that speaks to higher ideals that we can commit to, right? Juno can speak to the importance and the gravity of oath making. Juno is about taking one's value, one's vision and mission statement, not simply as aesthetics, not simply as this cute thing that you put on your website or your bio on Instagram to make you look cool, but of really letting it drip down into our belly, right? Into our way of being, our way of moving, our way of speaking in the world, right? And with Juno being also trining Uranus, there's a way in which I think there's kind of some shifting grounds here, right? Uranus can really call this into question. Uranus can be like, okay, that's really cool. That's what you say you're committed to. That's what you think you're committed to. Let me show you a deeper layer. And in showing you a deeper layer, or throwing you kind of a curveball, an unexpected situation, maybe you'll get to see another facet of that commitment, right? Doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to go from being really committed to something to suddenly leaving it, right? That may be the case, but that's not really what I'm sensing here. What I'm sensing is more that there's an opportunity for one's commitment to be challenged. And through the challenging, there may be a deepening that at first may seem like a redirection or a wobbling, right? You may be wobbling a little bit, but through the wobbling, you find more of how to balance oneself. The image I'm seeing is someone who's walking on a tightrope, right? And in order for someone to truly go from one end to the other on the tightrope. They have to constantly balance, right? And if someone has fallen from that tightrope, that's the only way that you can learn how to balance, right? If you never fell when you were learning how to ride your bike, you will never be able to ride your bike, right? That's just the nature of gaining skills in the world, right? And so Uranus trining Juno may really be bringing up the practical aspect. And I'm thinking about this because they are both in earth signs, right? What may really come up is questions around, is this commitment actually practical for me? You might notice that there are some things that you're committed to that now you're kind of questioning a little bit because maybe it's taking too much time. Maybe the energy of it no longer feels good to you. Maybe you say you're very committed to something, but you know somewhere deep down in your heart you're being called to another thing, or you're being called to do it in a slightly different way. And so paying attention to that, allowing the energy of change to start being present, right, in your field. You may not be doing anything about this within this very week, but becoming aware or noticing the places where your commitment is being questioned may be good to keep an eye on, right? And as you keep an eye on it, you might notice how I feel about this is shifting, how I want to orient towards this is shifting. All right, so I hope that was helpful. To me, this coming week feels very rich. It may not be a time that is too entrenched or too rooted in overthinking. It may require you to get quite busy. You might be noticing that things kind of come into your plate, and you may have to kind of respond to it. And the last thing I will say is inviting consciousness and awareness to how we respond to things may be really helpful for a week like this coming week. Okay, that is it. I hope that was helpful. Thank you for being here with me. If you enjoy these episodes, if you enjoy this podcast, I would really love your help in leaving a review. Reviews truly, truly help, whether that's on Apple Podcasts or if you're listening on Spotify, feel free to leave some stars or a comment on Spotify or reviews, literally, even if it's only like 4 sentences, is so massively valuable for this project. It's a free project. I intend to keep it free for as long as I'm doing it. It takes a lot of work, but I do it because it's so joyful for me, and I want as many people to find it as possible. The other way you can support the podcast is literally to share it with members of your community. If you have newsletters, if you have Instagram, I would really love if you share this episode, if it's helped you in some ways. All right, I will be back later this week with a beautiful, amazing, heart-nourishing conversation with Marissa Michelson and Katie Dove. And until then, I hope you take good care of yourselves, and I'm sending you so much love as always. Take care.